I'm gonna tell you something. Somebody messes with me, I'm gonna mess with him.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at the most infamous criminals, crooks, and gangsters of all time.
Pablo never had charm, he had power.
Samuel Bankman-Freed. Sam Bankman-Freed, the former CEO of FTX, was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his involvement in 7 counts of fraud.
A jury convicted him on all 7 counts of wire fraud as well as conspiracy.
When he founded the cryptocurrency exchange, Samuel Bankman-Freed became a financial celebrity.
It sometimes feels like the world is just going sort of in slow motion around us, and that we're going at, about an average speed by our standards.
As it turns out, it was an image based on theft and fraud. The charges included stealing customer funds and lying to investors and creditors, totaling at least $8 billion.
It was basically a whole bullshit trading platform.
Despite his apology in court, the judge emphasized his lack of remorse. He also deemed Bankman-Freed a risk for future criminal activity. Finally, the judge denounced efforts by the erstwhile billionaire to influence witnesses and of committing perjury during his testimony. Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff masterminded one of the largest and most infamous Ponzi schemes in history. He defrauded investors of billions of dollars over several decades.
There are 2 pieces to a Ponzi scheme. You always have to attract new investment, and you have to make sure that you don't have a sudden outflow.
Madoff promised high returns. Instead, he used new investors' money to pay off existing investors. He built a gilded empire, a fraudulent facade of success. Madoff's scheme collapsed in 2008 during the financial crisis, revealing the extent of his deception.
The only reason that this ended was because at one given point in time, the economy did so badly that people needed to get money out of Madoff's investments.
His crimes resulted in devastating financial losses for thousands of individuals, charities, and institutions. The scale of the fraud was unprecedented, as were the decades in which he got away with it.
He confessed with pride. Like, look what I did. I mean, you're not going to believe what I did when you get to the bottom of this.
He betrayed and ruined untold lives, earning him a reputation as one of history's most infamous financial criminals. Freeway Rick Ross. Freeway Rick Ross, not to be confused with the rapper who took his name, was an infamous drug dealer in the 1980s and 1990s.
Put us on a whole different level of playing at that time. Nobody else was doing it like that.
Ross was a major figure in the crack epidemic, operating out of Los Angeles. His massive drug trafficking operation supplied crack to cities across the country. At its peak, Freeway Rick's empire netted him millions of illicit dollars a day. Ross was eventually arrested and sentenced to life in prison in 1996.
Rick was really the first crack dealer to start at the bottom and work his way up to a point where you'd say, this guy was rich. This guy was maybe, at a point, the biggest guy in LA.
The sentence was eventually reduced, and he was released in 2009. Ross's story has been the subject of controversy and fascination, as it highlights the devastating impact of the crack epidemic and the complexities of the war on drugs. Today, Ross is an author and a motivational speaker.
And just because you're in here, that don't make you no bad person. Because good people can make bad mistakes.
Leontine Min. Originally born in Ukraine, Leontine Min made a name for himself in the underworld as an international arms dealer, selling dangerous weapons to dangerous people.
Can you bring me the gun of Rambo?
Part 1, 2, or 3.
His more notorious clients included Charles Taylor, the controversial ex-president of Liberia, and several revolutionary groups across West Africa. While Min's business fueled the fires of war, the man was fueling himself with drugs, alcohol, and ladies of the night.
Would be happy to make you happy.
I can't.
He was discovered among the company of all 3 of those things, as well as around $500,000 worth of blood diamonds, when he was finally arrested in Italy in 2000. Dawood Ibrahim. Dawood Ibrahim is a ruthless Indian crime boss and terrorist believed to be the kingpin of the Mumbai underworld. His criminal syndicate, the D Company, ran every racket in the city, thoroughly organized crime.
I would say at any given time, D Company would have on its payroll more than 25,000 people.
Ibrahim is also suspected of having links to terrorist organizations like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Al-Qaeda. He was linked to the 1993 Mumbai bombings, which killed over 250 people and injured hundreds more.
I mean, for us, I think it was a 9/11 equivalent.
Ibrahim is also believed to have been behind violent attacks in retaliation for the demolition of the Babri Masjid Mosque. Despite being one of India's most wanted criminals, Ibrahim has evaded capture. He's believed to be hiding out in Pakistan.
Sources claim that in the last few years, Dawood has emerged as the Don of Karachi.
The Pakistani authorities deny the accusation. Jesse James. One of the most legendary figures in the American Old West, Jesse James was also a notorious train robber, and he and the other members of the James Younger gang weren't above murdering anybody who got in their way.
Open that safe.
Do it!
Over their career, James and his gang were believed to have stolen approximately $200,000. But were nevertheless admired in their home state of Missouri, mostly because of their support for the Confederacy during the American Civil War.
Jesse, in particular, had a flair for showmanship and dramatic storytelling, and he would use it to his advantage to sell himself as a folk hero.
James's status as a folk hero was cemented when fellow gang member Robert Ford shot him in the back. Guess the town wasn't big enough for the both of them. Charles Ponzi. You don't always need a gun to rob people blind.
And unlike most con men, it appears that he may well have believed in his own scheme.
Styling himself as a businessman, Charles Ponzi swindled millions of dollars from his investors with a plan that involved redeeming postal reply coupons from other countries for postage stamps in the United States, which could then be sold to make a profit.
Ponzi realized that done in enough size, this could make him rich beyond belief.
If it sounds too good to be true, that's because it was. And the only person who profited from the so-called business plan was Ponzi himself, who ended up pocketing most of the money.
At the core of what was going on here was a big lie.
Ponzi was a pioneer among white-collar criminals, and his legacy lives on today in what is now called a Ponzi scheme. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker and Clyde Chestnut Champion Barrow. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were a celebrity criminal couple who traveled to the central United States during the Great Depression.
We robbed banks.
They roamed the countryside, robbing banks, gas stations, and stores. Their intense combination of thrilling crime and deep romance fascinated the public.
You've heard the story of Jesse James, of how he lived and died. If you're still in need of something to read, here's the story of Bonnie and Clyde.
They and their Barrow gang survived shootouts with law enforcement and committed multiple murders. Their crime spree came to an end on May 23, 1934. Law enforcement officers ambushed and killed them in Bienville Parish, Louisiana.
Hey.
Their Grimm's fairy tale of a romance was sensationalized by the press. Some Americans saw them as folk heroes during a time of deep economic hardship. However, their actions were brutal and led to the deaths of several people, including police. Griselda Blanco. Griselda Blanco, also known as Black Widow, was the godmother of Colombia.
Wasn't for Griselda Blanco, there would be no Pablo Escobar.
She was a drug lord with deep ties to Miami's cocaine market during the 1970s and 1980s. Blanco was a major figure in the Medellin cartel, known for her ruthlessness and violence, and use of mules for smuggling illegal substances.
I'm gonna be here every night until you tell me yes.
Most of them were women with cocaine sewn into their bras. She was eventually arrested in 1985 and sentenced to 15 years, catching subsequent murder charges while in prison. After her release, she was deported to Colombia, where she was murdered in 2012.
When you've done so much bad in your life, that type of beef never goes away. That type of generational hatred, revenge, it don't go away.
James Whitey Bulger. You've got to be wicked smart to evade the authorities for as long as this Southie.
It's not what you do. It's when and where you do it and who you do it to or with.
Born in Boston, James Bulger quickly made a name for himself as a young ne'er-do-well known for stealing and getting into fights. Nicknamed Whitey by the local constabulary because of his light blonde hair, Bulger eventually moved up in the underworld, becoming the boss of Boston's Winter Hill Gang, where he was responsible for crimes that ranged from extortion to arms trafficking.
Bulger could wake up in the morning. He could look over across the water, look at the Boston skyline and say, I own this place.
In 1994, Bulger went into hiding and wasn't apprehended until 2011 at the ripe old age of 81.
For most of us, this was our first glimpse of Whitey Bulger.
In 2018, he was killed in prison by two fellow inmates. John Gotti. John Gotti, the Teflon Don, was a world-famous American mobster.
Gotti was a boss who reflected the times. He was always grabbing and reaching for more and more.
He led the Gambino crime family, one of New York's most powerful mafia organizations. He rose to power in the 1980s after orchestrating the murder of boss Paul Castellano. Gotti then took over a vast network of drug trafficking, extortion, loan sharking, and gambling.
Ironically, the neighborhood thinks John Gotti's keeping the drug dealers out of here. Yet John Gotti's a drug dealer.
Known for his flamboyant lifestyle and media presence, Gotti initially avoided conviction. Eventually, the law caught up with him in 1992 when he was convicted of murder and racketeering.
Tonight, John Gotti stands convicted, found guilty on every count against him.
The flip and testimony of his underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano, sealed Gotti's fate. He was sentenced to life in prison and died in 2002. Jean-Bernard Lnav. Sometimes the biggest criminals can be hiding in plain sight.
I should have known.
Originally born in France, Jean-Bernard Lnav was a wanted man in several European countries during the 1980s and 90s due to his arms trafficking, which broke several international trade embargoes. Lnav went on the run to avoid capture and eventually resurfaced in Florida, where he brazenly continued conducting his illegal business from the comforts of his extravagant condo.
This is paradise, I'm telling you.
He even had his own publicly accessible website where anyone could buy a fighter jet or a machine gun so long as they had the cash and the proper papers. After disappearing in 2002, Lnav was finally arrested in Switzerland that same year. Meyer Harris Mickey Cohen. You don't have to act in a movie to be a Hollywood star. Just ask Mickey Cohen, one of the most infamous mob bosses Los Angeles has ever seen.
He was a celebrity gangster. They all went out of their way to come to Mickey's table.
A scrappy fella who originally worked as muscle for the Mafia during Prohibition, Cohen worked his way up the organization's ladder until he reached the top.
Power is a vacuum. You walk in and you take it.
Always a snappy dresser, Cohen was as good a publicist as he was a gangster. He knew how to play the media and give even his most heinous actions a positive spin.
People that thought they knew who and what he was, they didn't.
It's no wonder then that Cohen was only ever arrested for tax evasion, despite having been guilty of far worse crimes. Amaro Kio Fuentes. For a while, there was no bringing down this Lord of the Skies.
During the 1970s and 80s, as Carrillo grew in confidence, influence, and power, so did the cartel.
Amaro Kio Fuentes was the leader of Mexico's Juarez cartel, a position he obtained by assassinating the group's previous boss, Rafael Aguilar Guajardo. Fuentes was known as El Señor de los Cielos, thanks to the giant fleet of planes he used to transport cocaine around the world. He was also one of the wealthiest criminals in history, with a net worth estimated at over $25 billion.
The DOJ noted that Amado and the Viceroy maintained their grip on the Juarez cartel by a chain of favors given and received.
Fuentes died in 1997 from complications during the plastic surgery he was getting to hide from authorities. Charles Lucky Luchano. Charles Lucky Luchano was a pivotal figure in the American Mafia, modernizing organized crime in the United States.
According to the FBI, the moment when Lucky Luchano rose to the top was the watershed events in the history of organized crime.
In the 1930s, he established the Commission, a governing body for the mob. He also restructured the New York crime families into the Five Families, an oligopoly of crime.
He even gave his organization a fancy new name, La Cosa Nostra.
Luciano had his fingers in every illicit pie in New York, from bootlegging and drugs to extortion. Though he was eventually imprisoned, Luciano struck a deal with the government.
Years until Luciano saw a new opportunity for freedom provided to him by an unexpected source: World War II.
He spent World War II working with his Sicilian Mafia allies to facilitate the U.S. invasion of Sicily. He spent the rest of his life operating out of Italy, dying of a heart attack in 1962. Kenichi Shinoda. Kenichi Shinoda is the current kumicho, or kingpin, of the Yamaguchi-gumi, Japan's most powerful Yakuza organization.
The U.S. Treasury moved to block Shinoda and his deputy, Kiyoshi Takayama, from any U.S. assets and transactions in an effort to freeze them out of the global financial market.
Under his leadership, the Yamaguchi-gumi expanded its operations globally, becoming deeply enmeshed in the global drug trade. The Yamaguchi-gumi also ran extortion, money laundering, and gambling operations all over Japan.
The Yakuza set up their own auditing firms. They set up their own investment houses. They are Japan's largest private equity fund.
Shinoda is known for modernizing the Yakuza's operations, establishing a corporate-like structure to their organizations. He also drastically expanded their influence in legitimate businesses. He is known for his strategic cunning and ruthlessness. By corporatizing his criminal syndicate, the Yamaguchi-gumi became a formidable force in the criminal underworld. John Dillinger. Yet another bad guy with good publicity. John Dillinger was a Depression-era bank robber whose penchant for breaking the law was complemented by his love of the spotlight.
Let's play a game, Mr. President. It's called Spin the Dial.
Dillinger was pretty fond of playing Robin Hood, stealing from the rich banks and giving his spoils back to the people. While these claims are still disputed today, Dillinger was painted as a kind of folk hero, an image that was only helped by his multiple daring escapes from jail.
I'll do it if I have to, don't think I won't.
When he was shot and killed outside a movie theater in 1934, a surprising amount of people appeared to mourn for the so-called public enemy number one, Joaquín El Chapo Guzman. His unique brand of viciousness and penchant for escape made Joaquín El Chapo Guzman, leader of the Sinaloa cartel, a household name.
Chapo Guzman lo era is public enemy number one in Los Angeles, in New York.
Guzman's cartel was responsible for smuggling staggering quantities of cocaine, heroin, meth, and marijuana into the United States. His viciousness bred fear in his enemies and friends alike, having orchestrated innumerable murders, kidnappings, and bribes to maintain power.
He was pretty much a psychopath. He would kill individuals that lost loads to set an example.
His two dramatic prison breaks in 2001 and 2015 allowed him to evade law enforcement for years.
Chapo disappears at 8:52 p.m.
Eventually, he was captured and extradited to the U.S. in 2017. 2 years later, Guzman was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Al Capone. He's the man who put the organized in organized crime.
I want him dead. I want his family dead. I want his house burnt to the ground. I want to go to the middle of the night. I want to piss on his ashes.
During the Prohibition era, Al Capone seized the opportunity to make buttloads of cash off of the, at the time, illegal liquor business. Capone's violent methods of expanding his bootlegging operation across the United States, including the bloody St. Valentine's Day massacre, went mostly unchallenged, thanks to the unsurprising fact that people enjoy their booze.
People are gonna drink. You know that, I know that. We all know that, and all I do is act on that.
Capone was a bit of a celebrity, and was even known to donate his ill-gotten gains to charities. Too bad he forgot to donate some of his fortune to the federal government, however, as he was put away for tax evasion in 1932. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into settings and switch on your notifications. Pablo Escobar. Formerly the main purveyor of Colombia's other addictive substance, Pablo Escobar wore many hats during his tenure in the Colombian-based Medellin cartel, including drug lord and terrorist.
Yo voy a ser grandioso.
Escobar's massive drug empire allowed him to become not only one of the most powerful people in his native country, but also one of the wealthiest men in the world, according to Forbes magazine.
The money, just kept building and building.
Escobar was able to keep his wealth thanks to his ruthless pragmatism. And he was always willing to bribe, bump off, or bomb anyone that got in his way. The violent man met a violent end in 1993 when he was shot during a rooftop chase.
Es el perfecto ícono del mal. Es tan buen narco que es una máquina de hacer dinero después de muerto.
Do any of our entries need to be locked up for life? Are there any other notorious gangsters that belong on this list? Let us know in the comments below.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.